Story 1. Yellow Noise, Level 0. It all started when the world just blinked. It wasn't a fall or a blow, but rather a short circuit in perception when reality lost its density for a split second, and I fell through the textures of my habitual existence. When my vision focused, I was no longer standing on the sidewalk. There was a damp, greasy carpet underfoot, which gave off a suffocating smell of old wool and mold. This place had no windows, just endless interlacing rooms with sickly yellow wallpaper. Lighting here is a separate kind of torture. The fluorescent lights are humming at such a frequency that the sound begins to feel physically, as if a tiny insect is vibrating inside the skull. This 170 Hz hum becomes your only companion. It fills the void, making it impossible to hear your own thoughts. I walked forward, turning identical corners, and with each step, the realization that there was no way out became more and more clear. The geometry of this level is deeply flawed. I saw how the walls converge at unnatural angles, how the ceiling suddenly drops so low that you have to crawl, and after a few meters, it goes into an impenetrable height. In some rooms, the wallpaper had been stripped off, exposing the gray, porous concrete, which seemed alive, as if it were slowly absorbing the surrounding light. The scariest thing is when the hum of the lamps subsides for a moment. In those seconds of absolute silence, you realize that the space around you is not just empty rooms, it's a huge, indifferent machine that digests your presence. There is no time here. There is only an endless now, colored yellow. I found strange objects on the floor, an empty soda can without a label, someone's shoe embedded in the carpet, a piece of newspaper where all the letters had been replaced with meaningless dashes. Each such find reminded me that I was not the first to be here, but perhaps the last to still retain the remnants of reason. My legs were buzzing from the endless walking, but sitting down and closing my eyes meant giving up on this place, letting the yellow walls become my skin. I kept walking, trying not to look at the shadows cast by the protrusions of the walls, because the shadows here lived their own lives. They lengthened and contracted incongruously with the lighting, as if probing the air in search of something.
Story 2. The Echo of the Turquoise Abyss, Level 37. When I crossed the threshold of another yellow room and fell through a narrow manhole, I expected the worst. But I found myself in a place that at first glance seemed like paradise. The air here was cool and smelled of chlorine, and instead of yellow madness, I was greeted by spotless white tiles and turquoise water. These were pools, level 37. Silence reigned here, but not dead, but filled with the soft echo of dripping water. The architecture of this place was majestic and frightening at the same time. Endless halls, separated by columns and arches, stretched beyond the horizon, and it was all filled with the purest water. Sometimes it reached up to my ankle, and sometimes I stood on the edge of the tanks, the bottom of which was lost in the azure depths. The lighting came from everywhere and nowhere. It was soft, like a summer afternoon, but there was no sun. I walked on the slippery tiles, and the sound of my footsteps echoed through the halls. There was something profoundly unnatural about this sterile cleanliness. The pools looked like they had been built for thousands of people, but there was not a single living soul, not a single abandoned thing, except for the water itself. The water was perfectly calm until I touched it. As soon as I took a step, the circles spread out over the surface, colliding with the walls and creating a complex pattern of vibrations. Gradually, I began to notice that the water was behaving strangely in some pools. A funnel would suddenly appear in the center of the stationary mirror, or a shallow bubbling would begin, although there were no pumps under the tile. I looked into the dark tunnels that went deep under the water, and it seemed to me that there, in the darkness, colossal shadows were floating, resembling the outlines of buildings or the ridges of prehistoric creatures. But it was just a trick of light and refraction. The danger of the pools was their monotony. After a few hours, the whiteness of the tiles began to sting my eyes, and the sound of the drops began to resemble a metronome, counting down the time to the end of my sanity. I found a staircase leading up, but it ended right under the ceiling, leading nowhere. I went down into the deep bowls, hoping to find a passage to the lower levels, but I only found more and more holes identical to the previous ones. It was a trap packed into the aesthetics of comfort. The water was warm. It beckoned to take a dip, forget yourself, and just go with the flow. But I knew that anyone who decided to swim in these pools risked never finding the shore. The walls in some places were covered with a thin layer of slime, and from the drainage holes came a sound like distant, muffled laughter. I tried not to look into the deep water because its turquoise purity reflected the sky, which there was not, and this sky was covered with gray, lifeless clouds.
The final archive, the end level. I thought I had found the exit when I saw a massive steel door with a neon exit sign. My heart started pounding in dying hope, and I yanked the handle on myself. But there was no street outside the door, no city, and no people. I found myself in a library that seemed to occupy the entire space of the universe. It was the end level, a place where information turns to dust. There was no water or yellow walls, just endless rows of beige metal shelves crammed with untitled books. The floor was covered with cheap gray carpet, and old cathode ray tube monitors stood on chipboard tables. The lighting here was dim. The lamps were blinking, creating a strobe effect that made my head spin. The same line ran on the monitor screens. The end is near. Please wait. I went to one of the shelves and picked up a book. All of its pages were completely blank, except for one, on which was printed the date of my birth and the coordinates of the place where I was now. Everything was recorded in this archive, but at the same time, there was nothing valuable here. The silence of this level was so dense that I could hear my own heart beating like a sledgehammer hitting metal. I wandered between the shelves, and it began to seem to me that the shelves themselves were changing their position behind my back.
The geometry was malfunctioning here. I saw how one shelf smoothly passed into another, passing through it as if it were a mistake in the program code. In some places, books were suspended in the air, frozen in the moment of falling. I found the lighting control panel, but all its buttons were filled with a black, viscous substance similar to fuel oil. There was no fear of persecution in this place. There was a fear of final disappearance. You realized that you had become part of the metadata, a line in the endless catalog of oblivion. The air here was dry and dusty, and it scratched my lungs with every breath. Sometimes I could hear the sound of a printer running from the depths of the archive, but when I followed the sound, I found only empty tables and blank screens. On one of the monitors, I saw an image of myself from behind. The camera was hanging directly over my head, but when I turned around, there was only a cold ceiling with cracked tiles. I realized that this level is a digital death mask of reality. There is no future here. There is no way out. There is only the archiving of your horror. I sat down on a chair which creaked so loudly that the sound seemed to tear the space. There was a note on the table, written in my handwriting: "Don't turn around if the lights go out." And at that moment, the light above my head began to slowly fade, plunging endless rows of empty books into absolute, impenetrable darkness in which there was not even an echo. The end was not an event, but a state, and I dissolved into it. My presence here was a mistake that the archive was slowly correcting, erasing my memories one by one, until there was nothing left in my head but the blue static noise of the monitors. It was the final. All paths ended here, and the eternal, silent emptiness began. There is no place in this archive for the living, only for those who have become part of its endless, silent shelves. Every book is someone's erased life. Every screen is a witness to the final collapse. I closed my eyes, and the sound of old computer fans became my last lullaby in this endless, dusty crypt of forgotten data. Reality finally crumbled into pixels, leaving me alone with this eternal darkness.